Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this session on exploring insights for the Global Infrastructure Resilience Survey. That was part of the Global Infrastructure Resilience Report launched yesterday here at the CDRI Pavilion. So just to say, this session is being recorded. And actually, this recording is quite it's going to be quite important because it will form part of a on the page, on the website, and the space that CDRI is dedicated to the report and to the specific chapter of the GIRS survey. We will have the working paper, so a dedicated report that is coming out later this year. It will have the chapter, obviously, talking about the findings of the survey. And we will have this video, so people, and a blog, right? So people will have really many, it's multimedia, really dedicated set of resources. So this video and the recording of this video is going to be important for that. And so thank you for taking part. Now, next slide, please. So I'm Savina Carluccio, and I'm the Executive Director of the International Coalition for Sustainable Infrastructure, or ICSI for short. ICSI had the honor to be the implementer of the Global Infrastructure Resilience Survey, specifically for infrastructure experts and professionals. And this survey was one of the component elements of the Global Infrastructure Resilience Report, GIR 2025. Next, please. Just a little bit on the survey. We actually we're very pleased with the outreach of this survey, and I think, quite proud of the fact that the voice of the infrastructure professionals, and complemented by the views and perspective of the experts from across 100 countries, and we managed to reach over 3,000 of them through our engagement efforts. And I'm really pleased that the real world voices really have been included, and their perspective have been included in the making of this flagship publication. It is important. This survey, I mean, they're obviously, we say it's the largest of its kind in the sense, of course, there are surveys that are much larger. But of its kind, because this survey really specifically engaged with people on the ground, so this is really quite different from surveys like the Sendai framework, kind of the country's report. In this case, it's actually a bottom-up view of the implementation of infrastructure resilience. So over 3,000 responses. It was an online questionnaire, and it was complemented by interviews. We interviewed over 77 experts from over 47 countries. We held 5 roundtables in different, country-specific, Brazil, India, Egypt, and then I'm forgetting the other 2, but we did a lot of consultation for this, and in 6 languages. So really inclusive effort. So the methodology of this was a mixed method. So we complemented the more quantitative data from the online questionnaire, and then we analyzed the qualitative perspectives from the interviews and the roundtable discussions, and then complemented it with secondary data sources to analyze and then come to the findings that we will discuss today in this event. So today we are going to have a 2-part discussion. The first part is a fireside chat, where we will be discussing not just the infrastructure experts and professionals survey, but also not the other side of the Global Infrastructure Resilience Survey, which is engagement with the businesses, where we actually had the opportunity to hear from over 500 businesses from across the world. Next, please. So this is only just to show the spread of and the breadth of the different topics that were covered by the Global Infrastructure Resilience Surveys, infrastructure professionals and experts. So themes ranged from governance and institution to finance, risk assessment, technology, nature-based solutions, and also we had some question on monitoring systems, particularly in the context of Sendai Framework Target D. And they obviously closely align with the pillars and the different chapters that are covered in the GIR 2025 report. Next, please. So, as I said, ICSI, through our efforts and the various different engagements that we did, analyzed and produced. All the findings are going to be published in a standalone working paper. But then we also were the lead author of one of the chapters of the Global Infrastructure Resilience Report, Chapter 4, where you can find a lot more information on the findings that we will be discussing today. And on the slide, we got a QR code to download the executive summary of the GIR 2025. So now that's just a quick introduction so that we can get a bit of context of this. But I'm going to invite now the lead coordinated author of the GIR 2025, Eddie.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Savina. Please have a seat, and I want to invite Ashish Kulkarni from BCG. BCG was also our partner on the complementary survey that Savina just presented. So we were asking, okay, let's ask the infrastructure and resilience professionals working on the ground, what are the factors behind resilience or lack thereof of resilience in infrastructure? But it's also go and ask businesses who are dependent on infrastructure services, what is the impact that when disasters make those services fail, what are the impacts on their operation, the profitability, how are they handling that process? So we wanted to have this fireside chat on the two surveys to compare, to contrast, to bring into all this process. So very excited to have the two of you here. These surveys are in a way first of its kind in what they're analyzing. I think that the breadth of the infrastructure professionals covering more than 100 countries and more than 3,000 professionals has never been done before. And again, for the businesses, 500 businesses from more than 50 countries, we call it a pilot, but then it grew out so big that I don't think that we can call it a pilot anymore. Okay, so we'll present a few of these slides just to give you a sense of initial findings. And I want to start, Sabine, with a core question, which is capacity. I think that a lot of the respondents came and said, we really have an issue with capacity, both in the public sector and in the private sector. What were some of the findings? What surprised you? Tell us a little bit about different regions. Tell us about when you were looking at the results, you said, this makes sense, but the numbers are scary. So.
Thank you, Eddie. So yes, capacity definitely came up really strongly, both on the questionnaire, so the 3,000 respondents, but also from the expert interviews, really backed up this this finding of the capacity being limited. Capacity in the sense of, the ability to implement resilience, but also we asked the question on the availability of human resources. So it was kind of a double question. And then the findings were public sector, the public sector, just there is to put a data point, institutional capacity as the central challenge. Nearly 40% of respondents reported insufficient public sector capacity. So now, and this is an average data point, and but that kind of like resonates in all regions. I guess what surprised me is Latin America and the Caribbean, I guess, being really pessimistic in terms of respondents, in terms of both the level of capacity, but also availability of human resources in the public sector. The private sector was better in terms of responses from the survey, in terms of the public sector, so private sector having more capacity, but still limited. So that is something that we knew, but what surprised me is the level of
because when
challenge.
you start putting numbers to these questions, then you realize that we may talk about these issues, but it is really there. Yes. And actually, we had a similar set of questions for the businesses, because we began to say, look, what do you know? How are you handling this? Do you have the staff ready to be able to respond to the disasters? Do you have companies that can provide resilience services? Are you finding reliable partners, reliable suppliers of resilient solutions. So in this issue of capacity, altogether the ability of businesses to tackle resilience, what did you find, Ashish, in your survey?
Yeah, I think from the first of all, thank you for inviting me for this panel. I thank CDRI as well as ICSI for organizing this very important subject, and also it's a matter of pride for BCG to be involved in this first of its kind survey across the globe. So thank you all for having given us this responsibility as well as opportunity and gratitude. With that, I would say that the way we looked at businesses was in a three buckets. We had infrastructure companies, large infrastructure companies, and large businesses which were again dependent on the large infrastructure companies, as well as then the SMEs, which create the linkages between raw materials to the products to the markets, and to specifically with regards to the capacity building, I think there was the large businesses were in a much better. 70% of large businesses had the business continuity plans, and they had the teams. But if you look at the readiness, and around 60% of them had not tested them, and that brings to the point that if you it's just not on paper that you need to look at disaster resilience, but also time and again test it and make people and the management ready towards recovery and responding to the disasters. But if you look at the SMEs, which are very small, medium enterprises, they absolutely were clueless. It begs the point which the report also makes, that there needs to be a lot of policy and regulatory push towards the capacity building of all these SMEs in order to respond and recover to disasters. Most 70-80% of the MSMEs couldn't even recover after large disasters.
Absolutely.
So I think there is a lot of work to be done on the SME sector to bring about a change, and that will positively impact the overall economy in general, but also the profitability of these large businesses.
Absolutely. And what is interesting is that they are, you say, clueless. They are not clueless about the damages that they are facing. They are not clueless about the damages to their equipment, the losses to the clients, the losses of contracts that they have. What they are clueless is about what to do in that process. And there is not as clear of a linkage between the large companies and the value chains in this direction. So it was, to me, very revealing in that process. And what you said, a lot of these companies have the business continuity and the readiness in paper, but they haven't tested enough in that process. There was another number that I like a lot, which was 40% of the companies interviewed said that they don't have a reliable company to call and say, help us on resilience. There's a tremendous market opportunity for resilience companies, both to private businesses, but also to the public sector, because when you say, look, you may have 40% report insufficient public sector capacity, but actually only 15%, if I see the average, say they have adequate capacity. So if you look at the glass half full, it's actually quite small, the process. And I remember that 30% in the private sector only had adequate capacity. So tremendous gaps on the capacity side, both on the public and the private sector side in that process. So the next topic that I like to talk about is to say, look, what did you find, Savina, that these professionals were saying, what is the most important thing that governments can do? And the question was, is it really finance? Is it more investments? Is it capacity building? What did you find?
Yeah, so this is also another resounding finding from the survey. From across all regions in the world, the top priority that professionals thought the governments had to take action on is to strengthen policies, standards, codes, and regulations. So across the board, the question was, give us the top three. And so that had a bit different, slightly different nuance, I guess, in different regions. I think the top three were the codes, standard regulation, retrofitting, and maintenance. I'm so glad. I mean, I'm so glad the professionals think this is a priority, because actually is if you read the report, you will see that we find the invisible measures. So when we ask the professional, where is the money going to in terms of financing for resilience? And so the money is, they thought that the money is clearly going more to the new infrastructure project and to reconstruction after disaster than to risk-based asset maintenance and retrofitting. So, and for me, it's like, I know as a professional, it's a no-brainer that retrofitting and maintenance are a priority. But, and so the professionals, I'm so glad that this message came, and this was like a clear second to the top. And then in different regions, there was disaster preparedness actually was quite strong in Latin America, where obviously then experienced quite a lot of disasters. So for them, it was a priority, whereas in Europe, it was more on financing. So it's just there are obviously different regional connotation. So on the other thing on codes and standards and regulation, there was that they exist across the world in different level of maturity, but another message came clear that their enforcement is limited. So it's and the other message that came is like where they exist, they rarely include climate change, consideration of future climate. So that's another thing that like we need to be bearing in mind when we want to make a change. So yeah, we need to change them, update them, strengthen them, but also we need to make sure that the updates include consideration of future climate.
Absolutely. And we had similar question for businesses, because we began to say, look, the phrase that I use is that it takes two to tango. Businesses can do as much as they can inside their operations, but there are the disasters and the failures of infrastructure can overwhelm them in that process. What did you hear from businesses? What proportion did they think that they needed better policies, better support from the government?
Yeah, I think 85% was the number which came about. I think most of the businesses definitely need more support. They are aware of the policies, which are the large businesses at least are aware of the policies and regulations. But at the same time, in terms of early warning systems as well as the communication with regards to disasters, it would really help them in understanding uh, the absorb or the preparedness time can be reduced if they are actually in tune with the government related communication protocols. But at the same time, it's not just about the preparedness, but also from the recovery as well as responding aspects, how the government and the private sector work together is something that is coming out as a need. Uh, Also, from a perspective of business to business collaboration, uh, we talk about supply chains and we talk about how the integration of the MSMEs into the mainstreaming of both responding and recovering is very important for businesses to collaborate with businesses in order to make a point that this is something that is help like it's helping yourself by helping others. So in terms of protecting your value and protecting your economics or your profitability is dependent on protecting the entire supply chain. So there needs to be a private sector, public sector dialogue on disaster resilience, which can benefit both parties. Because at the end of the day, if businesses suffer on the whole, the GDP suffers, and we have seen the results that up to 7% is the amount of loss in GDP which our report clearly comes about. And if we are able to have a business to business collaboration, and that dialogue also would lead, and these two dialogues need to merge somewhere together so that effective way of actually responding and recovering from disasters is possible.
Yes.
And this is something that is going to happen more frequently going forward. It's not going to stop until unless we do a lot on the mitigation side as well as the adaptation.
Absolutely, and what we're also saying in the institutions and governance chapter of the report is that the infrastructure agencies should not only stop their responsibility at their resilience of their assets and their services, but it's really how do they work with communities and businesses so that they are also resilient. Because when an infrastructure service fails, the better prepared those communities and businesses are, then the less that they're impacted. They find alternative solutions, they help each other in that direction. Having that preparedness should not be just the job of the disaster risk management agencies. Infrastructure agencies, at the end, they have the customers, the electricity customers, the water supply customers, the bus customers, and therefore building the resilience is not just an internal exercise, it's one that builds into this process altogether. Now, what we also, another message of the report is that there's a lot of solutions. We discuss a lot on nature-based solutions. We discuss a lot about new technologies. We reviewed 35 technologies, more than 100 case studies that really showed us that, yes, solutions exist, but they're not being used as much. And that surprised me out of the survey. So, Savina, what did you find out of the use of these solutions?
So thank you for the question. So yes, we had almost this number that kept on repeating itself, which is 15%. And in fact, we ended up calling it the implementation ceiling. So 15% or less of implementation, consistent implementation of or inclusion of nature-based solution in projects. So respondents said no, it's 12 to 15%. Similar numbers for the implementation of advanced technologies for enhancing the resilience of infrastructure. So that is, and a similar actually implementation ceiling we had in data systems, and we also had in the capacity gap that we already talked about. So really, just it seems that that surprised me, I must admit. And also because I looked across the different regions, and I would have expected, for example, in North America, I would have expected a much higher number. Whereas, actually, the consistent use is quite low, and even much bigger the selective use. Selective use is bigger, but I would have expected that from that kind of advanced economy. I would have expected a larger implementation of mainstreaming of technology.
Absolutely. No, and I think that what we found actually when we were writing our nature-based solution chapters, that there's a lot of pilots here and there, but there are very few infrastructure agencies that say, okay, this is now our new way of doing resilience and using these nature-based solutions at a scale. But you also just asked the businesses, how are you using technologies for resilience? What did you find?
So the large businesses definitely are using some form of early warning systems, but at the end of the day, the technology providers are not quite reliant. Is what was the overall kind of response, and we need one data point or one communication for everyone. I think this needs to be somewhat standardized, as well as the push from the industries and the businesses. We're looking at government to provide this kind of technology which is democratized to most of the businesses through a centralized system, so that there is a there is credibility in the information which is getting passed, and also from the aspect that this becomes much more manageable and sustainable for in the long run for the businesses to maintain a steady state of technology which will be provided by the government.
Absolutely.
And this kind of, if at all, and we've seen there are models, and there are governments which are doing it in a very good way. I was just at the Singapore pavilion with just coming before this particular dialogue, and it was very evident that they are taking it very seriously as a government, and disasters are something on the top of their mind, and they see that in the next 10 years, if they don't do anything, then there is a 5-meter level rise, and that could affect their economy, their GDP. And in terms of how to use technology to reduce that is very much top of their mind, and that is something that I would like all the other nations to also look at, and go ahead and do this so that it saves all the businesses as well.
No, and I think that there's a tremendous market opportunity in a way that you need a very strong base of information on floods, on geolocation, on early warning systems, but you also have a business opportunity to translate all that information into risk analytics, into business continuity plans that are specific to an industry, a company with all of its locations. So I think that is not either or. The private sector is not able to do that risk analytics if there's not a base of information, and that base of information is not targeted enough for businesses to be able to use.
Yeah, also and there is a lot of technology. So there are countries which are actually looking at, including India. There are talks in the government where they could look at a centralized analytical model,
yes,
which will then be powered by AI, and it could predict.
yes,
And if we are able to generate that model as well as that engine from a technology point of view, and then democratize it amongst the industries, I think they will be much more benefited, because it will be robust, and it will be self-sustaining, because all of this, mind you, the technology as well as everything is a changing paradigm as we see, and for each business to invest in that and keep investing for the long term would definitely mean that they have to spend some of their resources onto it. Nevertheless, I wouldn't say that is not going to be a loss-making proposition, but coming from a centralized, authenticated, robust, trusted data is always something that can help.
Savina, you have the last word on a pitch so that everybody reads the chapter and, more importantly, the working paper. There are 2 or 3 things that really got you excited after doing this project.
I think for me, so if you read the chapter, you will find so much more depth and so much more color, and also some examples. I think the time is always limited. We just hang on to the data points, but like the example, I got Tonga. Actually, we have a speaker from Tonga in the panel. We have a case study from Tonga specifically on the multi-hazard risk assessment. We did a SIDS deep dive. There is a SIDS deep dive in the chapter that is really interesting, because it looks at the Caribbean SIDS and the Pacific SIDS, those 2 main groups, and finds differences between the different topics, and that's really fascinating. And the experts, I must say, they were very unforgiving. But it is the realism, I guess, of the people on the ground who implement. You need to be realistic, and I think this is the other exciting thing that I hope the decision makers and the readership of the GIR 2025 will actually find this quite refreshing. This kind of perspective from the ground, which is you're taking the pulse, and even though it's a bit hard to stomach, I guess, there's the kind of a bit of pessimistic view, but maybe it is actually close to the reality, and maybe it's a wake-up call.
Thank you very much for both. It was a great conversation. We're using these videos as part of our e-learning program to build out of the GIRS, so that it's not just a report, it becomes a live conversation that continues over the next month. Thank you, Ashish. Thank you, Savina, for
Right,
this
over
chat.
to me. This is like
Thank
I'm
you.
panelist and moderator now, changing rapidly into. Thank you, Eddie, for this fireside chat. Please, take a seat, Ashish. Right. Okay. So we're now on to the second part of this session, and I'd like to invite my panelists, and so there will be an opportunity to further deepen some of the nuances with some of the nuances from different perspectives from the panel on the topics that we've only just been talking about up until now. So let me just invite Bruce Chong, please, from Arup. Fellow and Director of Climate Sustainability at Arup. Please take a seat, Bruce. Dr. Nidhi Nagabatla from the UN University. She's a Senior Research Fellow there. And then Mr. Maka, Director of the, I've got this right here, of the National Disaster Risk Management Office in Tonga. So welcome, and thank you for joining us. Let me just make sure that you got a microphone. I'll just give it to you first. All right, so thank you for joining us today. We talked to so many people with this survey, and then I must say, I can't get enough about talking to people about this topic, because every time I learn something new. So thank you for joining us today. So we want to explore a little bit in line with the topics raised, and I will start with you, Bruce. So please introduce yourself, but if you want to say a little bit more about the work that you do, let me just ask you a question. So one of the things that the survey highlighted is that, and we didn't go into this in the fireside chat, is that the risk assessments are inconsistently applied across the world. So it is something that is recognized as is important, but it is inconsistently applied, particularly when it comes to integrating future climate scenario, which is also the same, similar finding to the codes and standards. So you have, you published a book. So that is the big news here at COP. You came to launch your book that is integrating principle of resilience, climate science, and financial risk assessment. So tell us a little bit more about your publication and how that can help people around the world implement resilience.
All right. Thank you, Savina. I'm Bruce Chong. I am responsible for the climate and sustainability, both business and services, across Southeast Asia and Asia Pacific. I'm based in Hong Kong, so I look after a lot of projects in Southeast Asia, the coastal area as well, especially super typhoon hitting the South China Sea, and also including a lot of our clients in Philippines, in Vietnam, across the coastal city in China, as well as in Hong Kong. So back to the question that Savina pinpoint about sort of the inconsistency of risk assessments across companies or to cities or different projects. I think I'm not surprised because, and I think it's no need to be too surprised. Well, when you find an architect, for example, to build a building, to design a building, of course, different architects, they may have different sort of design, right? And then the outcome definitely, or the outlook must be different. Now, of course, I'm not making it equivalent to risk assessment because it's not an artistic kind of a project. But I think I would like to point out that the book I just recently completed about climate science, engineering, and finance and across risk assessment. I think fundamentally we need to understand at least we find out the result of risk. Basically, we need to go through a very sort of rigorous kind of long process. But in a nutshell, we need to go through number one, right? I make long story short. Number one, climate modeling. Number two, hazard engineering modeling. And number three, finance modeling, right? And these three types of modeling are executed by three different expertise. And so you can see variations amongst different types of risk assessment. Of course, one dimension is that some companies or some clients, they, well, for the sake of just maybe, they just get the things done. They can just rely on a very rough understanding or rough analysis versus I need to actually build a seawall or eco shoreline. And that would involve a big investment. And therefore, I need to do a more rigorous kind of analysis. Now, this is one dimension of the differentiation between the inputs and outputs of risk assessment. But go back to the process I mentioned about the three models. Now, for example, the climate modeling, by the nature of using different climate data from GCM model, it already will result in at least two approach. Again, I make it simply put. Actually, for example, you use every GCM model to do an average for downscaling, what we call ensemble. Basically, you take average of all models, right? Versus you pick the more creditable, more accurate model in your locational specific site. So in AR6, we have around 40 numbers of GCM model. I usually, in East Asia, work with around 10 numbers of models, not every model. Versus a lot of commercially available product, they just blindly use all models doing averaging. Now this is already two types of approach on climate data projection and downscaling in relation to using different GCM models right now. I just point out why there is some differences. Which approach is better? Look at the book, right? Of course, there are pros and cons, okay? So I'm not surprised, no. Number two is hazard modeling, right? The hazard modeling, Savina, you correctly mentioned about also Tonga. We also work in Tonga, for example. A lot of hazard modeling is talking about how to set up a correct scenario. No, there is not sort of correct or not correct. Appropriate scenario for the end users, also for the decision makers to understand the level of risk or the extent of risk under different circumstances. So there is a technique to set out an appropriate scenario or sufficient scenarios to do the analysis. Well, of course, there are different hazards, and I just, again, grossly simplify it because there are different hazards, right? Are we talking about heat or talking about wind or flooding? Flooding, are we talking about inland or coastal flooding? Okay, let me give an example on flooding first, right? On flooding, when we are talking about multiple hazards, we are talking about, combining the scenario of, for example, the highest wind speed, right? The highest sea level rise together with high tide, and also under the circumstances of super typhoon, for example, strong wind, that induce storm surge, right? And in the correct direction, the direction of wind push the storm surge, and then it become propagated wave, and also push it to the inland. Now, this kind of sort of what we call direct hit scenario, meaning the super typhoon directly hits the location, hits the airport, hit the railway, hit the bridge. All right. Now, this is sort of the scenario that we need to set out, and a lot of companies or a lot of our clients, they don't even think about it. They just talk about, okay, simple scenario. Okay, 8.5. Okay, 8.5, 8.5. What does it mean? Oh, okay, just use the heaviest rainfall and do the flooding. That's it. This is sort of the extreme case, but it's not. there's a lot of extreme, beyond extreme, extreme. Okay, now, so this is something that we need to work out quite seriously, based on the location, based on different combination, and based on the possibility of happening. All right. Okay. Again, let's move on. Stop me if I'm too long, but I just want to complete the story first on the finance model. Actually, there are three types of finance model. One is for bankers, another is for property developers, or sort of the valuation experts. The third one is for insurers, right? And the key thing actually is that when we have done the hazard modeling under different scenarios, we usually have the outputs of quantified numbers in terms of damages and interruptions. So the time, the duration of inoperable time, so interruption time, and also the damages with regards to the system, the building or subcomponents of the building or infrastructure. Now, this information will be the input data for those three types of people: valuation, bankers, as well as insurers, to do their sort of financial model. So there are also different types of financial model. One is on credit risk, bankers. Valuation people on properties, of course, a property, price decrease. Insurers, they are doing their insurance model to calculate the premium that they need to, charge their clients and customers. So it's already, different variations in terms of, when they need different, outputs from the hazard model. They're already the variations. So maybe I stop here first, because I just try to explain to you, I'm not surprised by the variation, because, by nature, the process of doing risk analysis involves a lot of processes, and that's explain why there is different, results. But I think the point lastly is that it all subject to, the quality we need and what decision we need to make. If it's just for the sake of doing some kind of description or articulation of risk, fine. Take the easiest path. No need to spend too much time, because basically it's more or less the same, regardless of how much time you use. But if you're really about sort of infrastructure investment, right, talking about long term, right, devotion of money and resources, then you need to take it more seriously.
Thank you, Bruce. I mean, it makes, obviously, it needs to be proportionate to the level of investment in the type of projects that you are, So what you're describing is probably the gold standard, right, of what should happen. And we need to get it right, for sure, especially if there's so much at stake. So thank you for sharing this with us, and thank you for integrating the financial engineering and climate science. I think that is quite key, and it's not often talked about in the same framework. So moving on to you, Nidhi. So we talked about nature-based solutions, and there's a lot of examples that are not really very consistently implemented across the world. But can you tell us a little bit more about how you would use nature-based solution to reduce disaster risk? And also what is required, what is necessary so that the actually implementation is being scaled up?
Thank you, Savina. And I'm Nidhi Nagabatla. I'm the program head for Nature, Climate and Health at United Nations University in Belgium. And our main business is science-society interface and science policy interfacing. Having said that, one of my programmatic function is also to map the trends and the patterns of nature-based solution design, implementation, interoperability, cost-benefit analysis from the point of research, but also from the point of capacity development. We also conduct a lot of summer schools teaching and classes on nature-based solutions to build a capacity of the future engineers or future professionals on implementing this in the job space, but also as professionals who can then be employed by various sectors. Having said that, nature-based solutions, I think now that it has anchored its position in various multilateral environmental agendas, including the climate discourse, I think it's time that we try to unpack the complexity in integration of nature-based solutions. If I see it from three perspectives, and I'll just to make the long story short, I'll use three lenses. One is the research research lens, capacity, and policy. If we see the research lens, I think first of all, there is one misnomer that nature-based solutions are cost-effective. Not in all cases. If you just have to make a seawall, you just know the cost and you make a seawall. But if you have to plant mangrove, you have to make the cost of maintaining and integrate the cost of maintaining that mangrove for the next 10 years or 20 years till the time it starts functioning as a nature-based solution in the full capacity as the other infrastructure solution is giving you that benefit of disaster shield or coastal shield. I think one thing which we need to see in translating from research to operational domain is discount rate. So if we are pitching nature-based solutions to our policy makers, to our decision makers, you need to tell them we are either looking for 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, short, medium, long term. And we have to be really honest and clear about it to be able to see that we have the financial commitment for that nature-based solution. Second, capacity. I also teach civil engineering in a number of institutions around the world. I have students that I supervise, and as civil engineers, I think community needs to factor this discourse into their curriculum. So we have the workforce in the next 5 to 10 years to be able to understand this. If they don't understand this, they can't design it, they can't implement it. So let's start from the scratch. Let's start from the institutions, the first years, the second years, and have their assignments, their class activities. And as also I'm representing the platform for ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, which is a UN-led platform, interagency with other stakeholders, PEDAR in short. We have come up with the framework of ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, where we have tried to understand how different Rio commitments, whether the climate commitment through UN FCC or the land commitment through UNFCCD or biodiversity commitment through CBD can have synergies through the nature-based solution and can benefit from infrastructure-oriented professionals, especially the engineering sector. So implementing the 3 Rio conventions within this pathway of nature-based solutions, integrating it across and between sectors. The last point is of policy, and I think this term which you might have heard in various other COPs, but also we hear a lot in Brussels, the policy lobbies, PCD, Policy Coherence for Development. And I think that is something that needs to be unpacked in the context of nature-based solutions, sustainable infrastructure. What does it mean if your nature-based solution or your infrastructure design is clear on co-benefits? Are you able to leverage those co-benefits with multi-jurisdictional systems like taxation systems, green credits, or maybe kind of biodiversity credits, which BCG, the Biodiversity Net Gain, BNG, in the UK is one such example. So I think these are 3 main categories, but this is just for the sake of discussing, but in operationalization is much more complex and tiresome. Thank you.
Thank you, Nidhi. I think it's important when we think about nature-based solution to be used as disaster risk reduction measure is that we are looking at a spectrum, right? We're looking at a spectrum between the green and gray. We probably are in between, the green-gray, because we do, if this infrastructure protects community, more likely than not, we'll have a gray element that provides that reliability and that protection to the community.
Absolutely.
So, and I think that's, as an engineer, now up until now we're all engineers, we're all agreeing. I don't know if Mafua, if you're an engineer, but we're all agreeing that we need to protect community, and therefore, like in those specific cases, we need to make sure that we implemented the correct solution. Mafua. So I'm coming to you now. You are going to bring a very different perspective because you are in a public sector role. You are the director of Tonga's National Disaster Risk Management Office, and I mentioned before that our survey chapter, or actually the working paper, has a specific deep dive on SIDS, and we found that specifically in the Pacific, SIDS interagency coordination and regulatory enforcement appears to be quite weak, according to the respondents to the survey. With the resilience measure implemented reactively rather than proactively. So what strategy has Tonga used to foster more proactive and coordinated approaches?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to take part again in this event. Is that implementing the recommendations of the 2024 SEEDS UNDRR roadmap for infrastructure resilience, led by the Ministry of Infrastructure and support by the National Disaster Risk Management Office and SPC, Pacific Community, and CDRI. Strengthen the Tonga's infrastructure standards. So this works provides a clear step-by-step pathway to modernize the building codes and design standards across different sectors such as water, energy, transport, and telecommunications. Although that the current National Building Code remains the legal reference, Ministry of Infrastructure plans to introduce updated regulations, strengthening inspections and implement the entire improve the enforcement that's supported by the Building Control and Next Sector Standard Act 2002 and the National Environment and Climate Change Licensing System. Since the 2022 Tonga Ha'apai eruption and tsunami, significant retrofitting of schools and evacuation centers has been undertaken through the Tonga Safe and Resilient project and the national budget allocations, helping the embedment to embed resilience principles and prepared for broader code modernization and more consistent enforcement in the future. But let me go back to the science and engineering that we have discussed further here. I think the most important thing is the compliance and the definition that we are using here. For an island such as Tonga, with small islands scattered around, the definition for resilient infrastructure might be different. The way we look at it, if they travel from the small islands to the main islands, it seems like they travel to New Zealand. The infrastructure in the main islands is totally different to the infrastructure they experience in the island. So they look at resilience in the main islands as a well-structured construct. But for the islands, resilient infrastructure is, let me give you a classic example. It's like having a floating jetty, where disaster strikes you or a warning, you pull out the floating jetty from the water, and then after the impact, then you put it back. So that's resilience in terms of, from the island perspective. Thank you.
So that doesn't mean, thank you for sharing this. This is actually resonating from across the world. Many different people told us that they're not clear with the definition of resilience. It means different things to them, and so it's interesting what you're saying. And the example you're giving doesn't necessarily mean that you're building something, but you're protecting or you're taking measures to avoid disaster in a different way. So thank you for sharing this. So coming back to you, Bruce, so we heard Mafua mentioning standards and codes and enforcement, and particularly on the topic of the enforcement and the existence of technical standards. the finding is that there is much room for improvement. So what are the key challenges in your opinion in the space of codes and standards and the updating them so that they are fit for purpose?
All right. I think the variation across countries is like in the most advanced cities, Singapore, Hong Kong, versus developing places versus the least developed places. I think the challenge and the issue is quite different, right? Just the project that we work together with, like ADB, AIB, World Bank, in those something in between developing countries or rapidly developing countries, they will be actively educating themselves to, at least the works department, right? The engineering department, environmental department, they try to learn as we observe, right? And the bank or MDB, they imposed the framework, both mitigation, adaptation onto the project anyway. And the consultant, of course, the technical side, they will help, they will support, and then, most of the case, I see those countries like even Philippines, Indonesia. Well, I work quite, happily, with those government people. They try to learn, they try to build the capacity. But some of the countries or even the cities, they don't have the mindset yet. So talking about mainstreaming climate assessment, risk assessment into the infrastructure project would already be very difficult. Why do we invest more money into something that, without any return, for example? The mindset hasn't yet been changed. All right, now, going to more advanced places like Hong Kong, like Singapore, I think this is another issue on financing. Of course, it's not only in a single place, but I think in general, finance on adaptation, we all encounter the difficulties and challenge, but only in different extent. But in a nutshell, I think we all talk about scaling up adaptation and put more money or percentage on adaptation. Of course, I fully agree, but I observe that the key challenge in this aspect is about the quantification of cost and benefits analysis of the investment in between mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation is much easier to justify, right, in terms of energy saving, creation of carbon credits to be sold in the market, etc., etc. So monetary return versus adaptation project. Of course, everybody, they want to protect, they want to do, a lot, from risk avoidance perspective, but there is no monetary return. At most, avoidance of risk, lesser impact to GDP growth, lower maintenance costs, for example, potentially higher productivity because of a more stable environment, something like that, right? We see, also mentioned in the book, that we quote some of the research. I think CDRI can play a role as well. $4, when we invest $1. And some recent reports, from the bank, Standard Chartered, for example, they mentioned $12, which I quickly give a call to the sustainability director saying, okay, $12 is a bit at the high end, but just we observe the range, but some of our project is not positive. Some of our project actually is negative. So point to the years of investment that you just mentioned, I think is very correct. Is it talking about 5, 10, or 50, or 100 years investment? If you take, of course, a life cycle cost perspective, in the first 10 years, of course, your cash flow would be more or less negative because of the increasing, cash input. But maybe in the long run, you may have, a more positive cash input because of all the reasons that I mentioned, versus a business as normal kind of investment. But anyway, the point is, the benefits itself is quite difficult to quantify. We at most try to do is the avoidance of cost or avoidance of risk, sorry, not cost, risk, that we try to quantify as much as we can to justify the project. But at least from the perspective of private developers or private sector investment, I don't see, well, of course they invest some in it, but they don't see, a big ROI on it. That's why it also related to a lot of adaptation related project is not yet put in the taxonomy.
Right.
Mitigation, obviously, again, easier. Adaptation, we are still exploring how to put it in, in written form.
Right.
Because it's always case by case, it's not standardized. So I think this is a challenge. I would like to stop here. Yeah.
Thank you, Bruce. Nidhi, I'll ask you a question and then I'll come to you at the end. We'll probably have time for one more question from you. I know we had two more from you, but it's we're running. I think we're about to be kicked out of the pavilion. But I'll come to Nidhi first, and then I'll come to you. Nidhi. So part of the challenge is also the insufficient professional capacity. So we talked about standards, and but also the capacity of the professionals is a major barrier. Because you're coming from a research background, what can university and research institutions do, working together, very importantly with industry partners, to better prepare engineers for implementing resilient infrastructure?
I think they can do a lot together, as a lot happens when there is active and efficient collaboration and partnerships across different stakeholders, knowledge producers and the knowledge implementers. For example, I'll just expand the point on classifying economic benefits and non-economic benefits. While it's easy to quantify economic benefits, we can still use a quantification methodology. In quantifying non-economic benefits, you need to have a more innovative approach, maybe qualitative, maybe community-based indicators. So I think that's one key point to see, that where researchers can give you a sort of a template or a guideline how to incorporate and integrate multiple aspects or dimensions to make it inclusive and holistic. While some are easy, others may require empirical research, and that's where a research collaboration can give you that evidence backing. So that's point number one. Point number two is, I think together you can prepare learning content. So as much as the scholars or the academia needs the industry or corporations or implementers, and I think this engagement can be by both ways. The scholars also need some workspaces to test their ideas, to be able to do those internships or empirical learning spaces. And I think if these things are not that it's not happening, but we need it at a much more larger scale. We need our young scholars at universities not to just sit in front of computers and simulate, be in the real spaces, shadow the experts and engineers and implementers to understand that tomorrow when you're in the job space, you need to have that complexity management right from the start.
Thank you, Nidhi. And then I'll come to you last. And still on the topic on the professional capacity, this is something that is actually in places like in the States and places like Tonga might suffer a shortage of expertise and brain drain and reliance on external supports. So what steps is Tonga taking to strengthen the local capacity?
Thank you. Our office, the NDRMO, that's National Disaster Risk Management Office, Capacity Development Framework 2025-2030, provides a structural training for our engineers and planners and building inspectors in close collaboration with USB, University of the South Pacific, the Pacific Community, SPC, and CDRI SEEDS fellowship programs. We also have a new disaster data knowledge center within our ministry, Ministry of MATEC. MATEC stands for Meteorology, Energy, Information, Disaster Management, Environment, and Climate Change and Communications. So there are 8 departments within this ministry. There are other 2 newly added departments, which is the departments of CIRT, and look after computer crimes and cyber bullying, and also digital. So I think the most important thing for this data center is that to house the survey data. Not only that, but the design templates and maintenance guidance to ensure that that the technical information remains accessible long after the individual projects are completed. I think the other thing is that the way we look at the community capacity building. We tend to invite outsiders to help us instead of using our own people to conduct and do the training. So that's one interesting area that also help maintain our local engineers and planners and our building inspectors, because we all know that if that nowadays people are start to moving out to the green pastures, but we need to maintain them at home, and we need to factor in the traditional way of doing things from a country perspective, looking at from the finance side of the coin.
How do you convince them to stay? If they, like what, of course the training. I don't know, like about how do you convince the young people to stay?
Yes, I think the most important thing is that it's hard to convince nowadays. Young generations tend to see that the exposure is more interesting than make use of the talent that they have. So the way we try to is to look at the wages that we manage to give them and compare it to the neighbor countries.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's we tend to forget the resilience is also the people, right? So the younger generation will need to make them stay. Wages, of course, the opportunities, right, and making them feel valued. All right, so I will have to stop here, unfortunately. So thank you so much for your time and for your valuable insights that you shared with us on the panel. So thank you. I only just need to do one last thing for this COP before, which is, today is, closing my COP experience in Belen. So I'm just going to call Raina Singh from CDRI to just provide some closing remarks and then take us to the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Savina. This was a very, very interesting session. Thank you very much to all our speakers. And I just have 2 very quick points to say, because I don't want to, say there's enough, very, very insightful conversations that we've heard so far. So first, I really want to commend our partners ICSI and BCG for the fantastic work that has happened on this survey. As you heard, that this is a first ever global survey of its kind. There were more than 3,000 professionals, more than 500 businesses that were surveyed as part of this exercise. And if you read the chapter, like Savina said, it's only few numbers that we have talked about so far in this session. But if you read the chapter, if you read the working papers, you will note that it's a very rich analysis. There are only 7 messages in the chapter, but if you read the working paper, you'll find a whole lot of more insights. There are, insights across regions, across infrastructure sectors, as well as across different themes of the report that you will see. So please go back and do read that. The second thing that I want to mention, what I really liked about the surveys and the report in overall is the fact that it provides some very useful insights in terms of way forward. So from CDRI, we are definitely going to be using this over the next couple of years in everything that we do. We mentioned at the beginning of the session that this is going to be part of the e-learning module, the session that we have recorded today. We will be using this to inform our training programs. We will be using this to inform our technical assistance programs. But most importantly, I feel that this survey and this report also brings a whole lot of insights for other stakeholders, other actors in the space. So if you are a Ministry of Finance or a Ministry of Infrastructure and you want to know where should I put in my money with least amount of monies and getting maximum impact, so you can actually identify those invisible measures, as Savina put, and invest in those. If you are a practitioner or a local government and you want to scale up, how do you scale technologies and nature-based solutions? So what are those specific areas where you can focus on? And if you are a business, who's trying to maintain its profitability and business operations. So what are those key levers where you can actually invest as a business? So that's what you find in the report and in the survey chapters. A lot of case studies, practical examples, lessons of practice, and a lot of tools and actionable frameworks. So let me just end with that. And again, Savina, I'll draw from you. Like you, I'm going to be referring to this survey and this report everywhere we are going from CDRI and having every conversation. So thank you very much, everyone. And on behalf of CDRI, I thank all the speakers for their insights. Thank you very much.